The first thing I noticed when I woke up wasn't the ceiling, it was the sheer absurdity of the situation. Silk canopy above me. Perfume in the air that could choke a horse. And a maid kneeling by the bed with eyes wide as saucers, whispering, "My lady, you fainted again." Again? I blinked. Memory rushed in. This wasn't my life. I wasn't me. I was her, the infamous villainess from that cheesy romance novel I binged 3 summers ago. The Duke's daughter. The spoiled fiancée of the Crown Prince. The woman doomed to public humiliation, downfall, and, depending on the version I read, either execution or exile. I lay there, staring at the canopy, and one thought clawed through my mind. This is the best deal of my life. A villainess wasn't just a title, it was a career. Jobless rich person. No 9 to 5, no taxes, no need to think about groceries. Just carriages, dresses, and endless tea parties. All I had to do was toss the main plot out the window. Who cared if the Crown Prince was technically my man? He was just the first piece of garbage on this golden buffet. So when I strolled into the royal garden later that morning and spotted him, my illustrious fiancé, the scene was already laid out like a stage play. The prince, handsome in the sort of way only an author desperate for fangirls could design, leaned against a fountain. In his arms, some blushing girl with hair like spun sugar. He was smiling, oh, what a bright, princely smile. The smile, according to the book, that had made countless ladies faint. And I, the villainess, was supposed to see this, collapse into a puddle of jealousy, and fuel the heroine's rise. I squared my shoulders, tossed my curls, and said the first thing that popped into my head. "Your Highness, are you trash?" Silence. Dead silence. The prince froze mid-embrace. The girl squeaked, clutching her skirts like I'd just hurled an axe instead of a question. What did you say?" His Royal Highness blinked at me as though I'd sprouted horns. I tilted my head, tapping my chin. "Let's see. Cheating on your fiancé in broad daylight? Smiling like you're the nation's son while your hands are crawling all over her? Yes. You're trash. Maybe even hazardous waste. Should I report you to the palace sanitation department?" The girl in his arms gasped. The prince's ears turned crimson. I didn't wait for his answer. My tears were too expensive to spend on a man who treated loyalty like disposable cutlery. Instead, I gave a crisp nod and added, "Thank you for confirming, Your Highness. I'll be taking out the trash later. Please continue." Then I spun on my heel, skirt swishing like a weapon, and marched away before anyone could stop me. Behind me, I heard muffled chaos, the girl's sniffles, the prince's stammering, but I was already too busy grinning like a madwoman. Freedom. That's what this was. I wasn't chained to the story anymore. I could walk right out of this doomed engagement and into a life of leisure. Of course, life had other plans. Later that evening, during dinner at the ducal estate, my family stared at me as though I'd announced I wanted to be a traveling circus performer. "You what?" My father, the mighty duke, nearly choked on his wine. "I called His Highness trash," I said, spearing a roasted potato with deliberate calm. "Because he was. And I think we should dissolve the engagement before my reputation gets contaminated." My mother dabbed her lips with a napkin. "Darling, you can't just call the Crown Prince trash in public." "Why not?" I popped the potato into my mouth. "It's accurate." My younger brother, ever the menace, burst into laughter so loud it rattled the tableware. "I like this new version of you, sister. You're finally speaking the truth." Father groaned, clutching his temples. "The Crown Prince will raise hell over this. Do you want our entire family dragged into scandal?" "Better scandal than bad taste," I shot back. "Besides, if he's that thin-skinned, maybe the throne should come with a warning label." For a moment, silence hung over the table. Then, unexpectedly, Mother let out a snort. Well, she isn't wrong. That was the night I realized 2 things. 1, my family was going to be far more entertaining than I remembered from the novel. 2. This world wasn't going to know what hit it. The villainess wasn't going to cry. She wasn't going to beg. She was going to laugh, roast, and live however she pleased. And somewhere deep in my gut, a thrill sparked. Because the story hadn't even begun yet. The royal court was buzzing the next morning. Nobles in embroidered silks whispered behind their fans, guards tried to look invisible, and courtiers craned their necks for gossip. All because of one announcement. I was breaking my engagement with the crown prince. And I was going to enjoy every second of it. The prince stood at the center, golden hair polished, smile trembling like a cracked porcelain mask. He looked at me as though silently pleading for discretion. Poor man. He still thought I was the kind of woman who'd weep in the shadows. Your Highness, I said sweetly, stepping forward in my crimson gown, I've reflected deeply on our relationship. I've considered your extracurricular activities. I let my gaze drift deliberately toward the heroine in training, who was trying to blend into a marble column. And I've come to a decision. The room leaned in, hungry for scandal. I curtsied. I would like to return you. Gasps. Dozens of gasps. One lady even dropped her fan. The prince's jaw worked. Return me? Yes. Return. Like defective merchandise. Consider this engagement a receipt, and I'd like a full refund, preferably in peace of mind. Lady. Duke's daughter, I corrected brightly. Soon to be single Duke's daughter. You're welcome to keep your mistress, Your Highness, though I do recommend labeling her fragile. Handle with care. The courtiers erupted in whispers. I caught phrases like brazen and refreshing and, my favorite, I want her at my next tea party. The king himself looked torn between outrage and amusement, his beard twitching as though it couldn't decide whether to frown or laugh. The prince spluttered, face redder than his velvet cape. You dare humiliate me? Oh no, I interrupted with a hand over my heart. You did that yourself. Public garden, daylight, witnesses. If anything, I'm doing you a favor by cutting things cleanly. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have better uses for my time than managing a compost heap. And with that, I turned on my heel and walked away. The court was left stunned in my wake. The villainess had just tossed the script into the fireplace. By the time I returned home, the ducal estate was vibrating with tension. Servants scurried like rabbits, and the butler looked pale enough to faint. My father stormed into the parlor, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Do you have any idea what you've done? Yes. I sipped my tea calmly. I broke up with the nation's most famous cheat. Not just broke up, you roasted him in court. Father's voice cracked. In front of the king. I tilted my head. So? The king didn't stop me. He even looked like he enjoyed it. Enjoyed it? My father sank onto a chair, pinching the bridge of his nose. My daughter has turned the royal engagement into theater. That's generous, I said. It was more like street comedy. Admission free. My younger brother sprawled across the couch, laughing so hard he nearly spilled juice down his shirt. You should have seen father's face when the messenger told him. He went whiter than flour. Shut up, father growled. Don't shout at him, mother said from her embroidery chair, her tone suspiciously mild. Our daughter did the right thing. That prince was a waste of silk stockings. Better now than later. Father looked betrayed. Not you too. Mother smirked, needle flashing in her hand. What? Would you rather she clung to a man who treats her like an accessory? I, for one, prefer my daughter free to make her own choices. I raised my teacup in salute. Here, here. The butler shuffled in, clearing his throat. Ahem. Forgive the intrusion, but there are numerous letters from the capital. From whom? Father asked warily. The butler adjusted his glasses. Mostly young lords. And some older ones. It seems the young miss, is now considered highly desirable. I nearly spat my tea. Desirable? Yes, my lady. The nobles are calling you bold, witty, and, alluring. Several marriage proposals have already arrived. One man even sent a poem comparing you to a burning comet. My brother howled with laughter, nearly falling off the couch. You're the hottest scandal in the kingdom. I groaned, pressing my palm to my forehead. I roasted a prince, not auditioned for a harem. Mother's smile turned sly. Well, dear, men do love a woman who isn't afraid to speak her mind. Father made a strangled noise. This is a disaster. For me, though? This was the start of freedom. I stretched luxuriously, ignoring the stack of letters. Let the vultures circle, I wasn't about to trade one crown-shaped headache for another. Of course, fate has a sense of humor. Because the very next week, I crossed paths with a man who wasn't like the others. A man with sharp gray eyes, a sword on his hip, and the air of someone who could cut through the noise of the world with a single word. The Duke of Lorne. The novel had mentioned him only in passing, a background character who never stepped into the spotlight. But when his gaze locked onto mine across the ballroom floor, the corners of his lips twitching like he was barely holding back a smirk, I knew my peaceful, man-free retirement plan was about to be wrecked. The ballroom glittered like a jewel box. Chandeliers rained light over silk gowns, polished boots clicked on marble, and the air reeked of perfume and gossip. I had no intention of mingling. The only reason I was here was because my mother threatened to personally drag me by the hair if I skipped. Appear once, smile, then you can vanish, she'd said. So I stood near the refreshment table, nibbling on candied almonds and avoiding men who looked eager to propose by dessert. That's when I felt it, that sharp sensation of being watched. I turned. Across the crowd, he stood like a shadow among candles. Tall, broad-shouldered, clad in dark military dress that made everyone else look like overdressed peacocks. Gray eyes, cool, assessing, met mine. His mouth tilted, almost a smirk, as if he'd already figured me out. The Duke of Lorne. A man the novel had barely bothered to name. A side character. And yet, why did he look like he'd just walked out of a different story altogether? Before I could slip away, he crossed the floor in long, purposeful strides. The crowd parted for him instinctively. He stopped before me and bowed just enough to be polite, not submissive. Lady Marianne, he said, his voice low, smooth, carrying the weight of command. I arched a brow. You know me? The entire kingdom knows you. His gaze flickered, amused. You're the woman who asked the crown prince if he was trash. Several heads turned toward us. I heard a stifled giggle behind a fan. I smiled sweetly. And you, my lord, are the man bold enough to repeat it to my face. Boldness is a habit of mine. He reached for a glass of wine from a passing tray, his fingers brushing the stem with practiced elegance. I find it refreshing. So few in this court speak the truth. Truth is expensive, I said lightly, popping another almond into my mouth. But I don't mind spending a little. His eyes lingered on my lips just a beat too long. Dangerous habit, Lady Marianne. Someone might mistake your honesty for recklessness. Let them, I murmured, lifting my chin. Better reckless than boring. For a moment, silence stretched between us, taut as a bowstring. My heart thudded louder than I cared to admit. Then, from behind us, my brother appeared, a devil's grin plastered on his face. Oh, this is fun. Sister, is this the part where you roast him too? Or are you saving that for later? I elbowed him sharply. Go haunt someone else. But the Duke chuckled, actually chuckled, deep and smooth. Your brother is right. I did come here expecting to be roasted. I blinked. And why would you want that? Because it's the only honest entertainment in this kingdom. He sipped his wine, gaze never leaving mine. But it seems you're sparing me tonight. I tilted my head, weighing him. Stoic. Unflinching. And somehow amused by my barbs instead of offended. It was irritating. Attractive. Both. Don't get used to it, I said, turning away, but my smile betrayed me. Later that night, when the music swelled and couples filled the floor, I was content to sit out. Dancing meant dealing with sweaty palms and forced smiles. But apparently, fate was in a playful mood. Dance with me, the Duke said, suddenly at my side. I blinked. Excuse me? Dance, he repeated, offering his hand. Not asking. Demanding. I crossed my arms. Do I look like a woman who takes orders? No, he said simply, eyes glinting. That's why I asked you. The audacity. My lips twitched despite myself. With a huff, I slipped my hand into his. Fine. But if you step on my toes, I'll sue you for damages. He didn't step on my toes. He moved with precision, each step crisp, confident, as if he'd studied me before I even agreed. And then, disaster. Halfway through the dance, the prince himself stormed onto the floor, face twisted with jealousy. Marianne, he snapped. You would dare flaunt yourself with another man, after insulting me? I smiled sweetly, still in the Duke's arms. Ex-fiancé. You've been returned. Did you lose the memo? The crowd burst into laughter. The prince's ears went scarlet. He lunged forward, but the Duke shifted subtly, placing himself between us. His hand tightened around mine, firm, steady. She is dancing with me, he said quietly, yet his voice carried across the room. If you cannot stomach that, Your Highness, perhaps you should take your leave. The silence was deafening. The prince's mouth opened, then shut. He spun on his heel and stormed off, cape flaring like an offended rooster. When I looked back at the Duke, he was smirking faintly, gray eyes glittering with satisfaction. You didn't have to do that, I muttered. I know, he said, voice low enough for only me. But it was worth it to see you smile. My heart skipped, traitorous thing that it was. I pulled back quickly, breaking the dance hold. Careful, Duke. Compliments are dangerous around me. They might be mistaken for affection. His lips curved in that infuriating almost smirk. Then perhaps I'll risk it. That night, long after I'd escaped the ballroom and collapsed into bed, I replayed the dance in my mind. His hand at my waist, his steady steps, his shield between me and the prince. Trouble, I thought. The Duke of Lorne was going to be trouble. And for the first time in this new life, I wasn't entirely sure I minded. If someone told me that breaking an engagement would turn me into the kingdom's hottest commodity, I would have laughed in their face. But here I was, 4 days later, staring at a mountain of letters on my vanity. Invitations to dinners. Proposals written in desperate poetry. One man even sent me a self-portrait, shirtless. I burned that one immediately. Is it too late to elope to another country? I muttered, flicking through the pile. My brother sprawled across my bed, reading one aloud in a pompous voice. To the radiant comet who scorched the prince himself, I offer my undying low. Stop, I groaned. That letter's already given me indigestion. He snorted. I've never seen you so popular. Who knew calling the prince trash would make you a trendsetter? I tossed a cushion at him. Get out before I strangle you with a ribbon. But the truth was, I didn't care about any of them. They all looked at me like a prize, a shiny rebellion trophy. And I wasn't anyone's trophy. Which was why I noticed him immediately when I stepped out into the garden that afternoon. The Duke of Lorne. Again. He leaned against a marble pillar like it had been built just to support his brooding. Black coat, gloves, sword strapped to his hip. He looked like the sort of man who ruined women with a glance, and unfortunately, his glance was aimed at me. Duke, I said warily. Are you stalking me? Yes, he replied without hesitation. I choked. Excuse me? Relax, he said, that almost smirk tugging at his lips. I'm here because your father asked me to discuss military supply routes. You just happened to wander into my path. Happened, I echoed, narrowing my eyes. You know, most people would deny stalking. Most people are liars, he said simply. I opened my mouth, closed it, then huffed. You're insufferable. And yet you haven't walked away. Damn him. He was right. Over tea, he didn't bother with small talk. Instead, he leaned forward, gray eyes fixed on me like I was a puzzle. You're different from what I expected. Expected what? I asked dryly. That I'd shriek and faint after the breakup? Throw tantrums? Maybe poison the heroin? His lips curved. Something like that. But instead, you laugh. You roast. You defy. Because I'm not a fool, I said, sipping my tea. Why cry over spoiled food when I can feast on something better? His gaze flickered to my mouth again, traitorous habit. My pulse skipped, and I set the cup down quickly. You really don't care what people think of you, he murmured, almost to himself. I care, I corrected. I just don't worship their opinions. That's the difference. That smirk, gods, that smirk, deepened. Dangerous woman. I rolled my eyes. Says the man skulking around my garden. Later that evening, as I prepared for yet another unwanted ball, my family cornered me. Father paced, grumbling. You cannot keep humiliating every suitor. Do you realize the chaos you're causing? Mother barely looked up from her embroidery. Oh, leave her be. The girl is finally having fun. I am not having fun, I snapped, tugging at my gown. I'm dodging proposals like arrows in a battlefield. My brother leaned against the doorframe, grinning. At least one of them's worth dodging into. I froze. What's that supposed to mean? He wiggled his brows. The Duke. You think I don't notice how you glare at him like you want to set him on fire, and yet you keep talking to him? Heat rushed to my cheeks. I glare at everyone. Not like that, he sing-songed. I threw a hairbrush at him. He dodged, cackling. Father groaned. This family will be the death of me. The ball that night was the same circus as always, music, chatter, suitors orbiting me like moths around a flame. I was halfway through fending off a baron's terrible poem when a familiar voice murmured in my ear. Enjoying yourself? I stiffened. The Duke. Close enough that his breath tickled my neck. Do you mind? I hissed, whirling on him. Some of us are busy dodging bad poetry. He glanced at the Baron, who immediately scurried away like a terrified rabbit. Then those gray eyes slid back to me. Better? You're insufferable, I muttered again. You've said that twice now. He leaned closer, his voice dropping low. I'll take it as affection. My heart jumped, traitor. I forced a laugh. Affection? Please. If I were affectionate, you'd know. Oh. His smirk sharpened. I look forward to finding out. My breath caught before I could stop it. And just like that, he stepped back, leaving me simmering with irritation, confusion, and something far more dangerous. Trouble. He was nothing but trouble. But saints help me, I wasn't running anymore. I was determined to avoid him. For 3 entire days after that ball, I swore I wouldn't so much as look at the Duke of Lorne. If I saw him in the distance, I changed corridors. If I heard his voice in the garden, I spun on my heel. Unfortunately, the man was persistent. Like a stubborn stain on silk. And worse, he seemed to enjoy the chase. It started innocently enough. I was in the library, perched on a ladder, tugging a heavy volume of poetry off the shelf. Careful, came that infuriatingly smooth voice. I froze. Why are you always where I am? Fate, he said easily. Or stalking. Take your pick. I rolled my eyes and yanked the book down, too hard. The ladder wobbled. My stomach lurched. Before I could scream, strong hands caught me by the waist and steadied me against a broad chest. The Duke. Of course. You really ought to be more careful, he murmured, his breath brushing my ear. I shoved at his chest, though my pulse betrayed me by racing. And you really ought to stop lurking like a phantom. His lips curved dangerously close to mine. Maybe I like catching you. My heart tripped. For a second, the world shrank to the feel of his hands at my waist, the heat of him pressed against me. I caught myself leaning in and shoved him away with all my strength. Don't get used to it, Duke. I'm not some helpless damsel. He let me go, smirking like a man who'd just won a battle I didn't even know we were fighting. The next evening, my brother barged into my chambers with a grin sharp enough to cut glass. You've got it bad, he sang. I hurled a cushion at him. I don't know what you're talking about. You're blushing, he pointed out gleefully. I'm sunburned, I snapped. At night? I reached for another cushion, but he darted out the door laughing. It should have ended there. But fate, or stalking, as I suspected, had other plans. A week later, I was cornered again. This time in the ducal stables. I'd slipped out for fresh air, only to find the Duke leaning against a stall, stroking the muzzle of a restless black horse. He looked devastating, coat undone, sleeves rolled, forearms taut with strength. Do you practice looking like trouble, I demanded, or does it come naturally? He turned, eyes glinting. Naturally. My heart tripped again. Traitor. I tried to stride past him, but he caught my wrist, gently, firmly, drawing me back. Why do you keep running? He asked softly. Because you're dangerous. He stepped closer, his hand sliding from my wrist to my fingers. His voice dropped, low and husky. Then stop running and find out what happens. My breath hitched. The stable was too quiet. His gray eyes bore into mine, unflinching, hungry. For a heartbeat, I wanted to close the distance. To let his lips steal the words from mine. And then... Sister. We both jerked back like guilty teenagers as my brother's voice echoed through the stable. He rounded the corner, saw us, and promptly dropped his jaw. Oh, he drawled, grin spreading. So that's why you've been sneaking off. My face burned hotter than a forge. Get out. The Duke chuckled under his breath. My brother winked. Careful, Duke. My sister bites. Good, the Duke said smoothly, eyes never leaving mine. So do I. I nearly strangled them both. That night, lying awake in my bed, I replayed it all. His hand steadying me, his words in the stable, the way his gaze lingered like fire I couldn't put out. This wasn't part of my plan. My plan was freedom, leisure, mockery. Not this. And yet, my lips tingled with the memory of almosts. My body remembered the heat of his touch. I pulled the covers over my head and groaned. I was in trouble. Real trouble. Breakfast at the ducal estate had turned into a battlefield. My father sat at the head of the table, face pale from a sleepless night of worrying about politics. My mother calmly buttered her toast as if nothing on earth could rattle her. My brother, of course, was grinning like a fox who'd just discovered the henhouse. And then there was me, trying to eat in peace while ignoring the latest scandal. Apparently, my brother began loudly, half the capital is betting on whether our sister will marry the Duke of Lorne before the year ends. Odds are 2-1 in favor. I nearly choked on my tea. What idiot started a betting pool? Probably the same idiot who started the pamphlets, he said gleefully, tossing a folded sheet onto the table. Look. The villainess who burned the prince and captured the Duke. Quite the title. I snatched it up, horrified. There was a crude drawing of me pointing at the prince, who was crying into a handkerchief, while the Duke loomed behind me like a dark guardian angel. My father groaned. We are ruined. We are thriving, my mother corrected smoothly. For once, our daughter is interesting. I buried my face in my hands. Please let me die. Of course, things only got worse when I attended a garden party later that week. The prince was there. He cornered me the moment I stepped onto the lawn, eyes red-rimmed, hair disheveled like he hadn't slept in days. The picture of regret, if regret looked like a sulky rooster. "Marianne," he said urgently, catching my wrist. "Please, let us talk." I yanked my hand free. "No refunds, remember? You were returned to sender." "Don't be cruel," he pleaded. "I made a mistake. The girl, she was nothing. You're the one I don't." I held up a hand. "You cheated in broad daylight. That wasn't a mistake, it was a choice. And I don't recycle trash." His face twisted. "How can you call me trash when—" "Because you are," another voice cut in, low and sharp. "The Duke of Lorne." He stepped between us, his hand brushing mine just briefly, reassuring, before settling firmly on the hilt of his sword. His gray eyes pinned the prince with icy disdain. "You've had your chance," he said. "You threw it away. Don't crawl back now and insult her further." The crowd had gone silent. Dozens of nobles were watching, whispering behind fans. The prince's face flamed scarlet. He sputtered something incoherent and stormed off, cape flapping like a wounded bird. I exhaled slowly, my pulse hammering. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," the Duke said quietly, leaning down just enough that his words brushed my ear. "I did." The rest of the party was a blur of music and chatter, but I couldn't shake the way he'd stood between me and the prince. Protective. Possessive. Dangerous. And apparently, neither could he. Because later, when I tried to slip away into the empty corridor leading to the garden maze, he followed. "Do you plan to shadow me forever?" I demanded, spinning on him. "Yes," he said simply, that infuriating half-smile tugging at his lips. I scowled. "You're impossible." "And you," he murmured, stepping closer, "drive me insane." My back hit the wall. His hand braced beside my head, his body close enough to trap me in. My breath caught. "This is dangerous," I whispered. "So stop me," he challenged softly. But I didn't. Saints help me, I didn't. His lips brushed mine, light at first, testing, like he was giving me a chance to run. Then deeper, firmer, stealing the air from my lungs. Heat exploded through me, sharp and dizzying. My hands fisted in his coat before I could stop myself. When he finally pulled back, his voice was rough. "Still think I'm just trouble?" I struggled to steady my breathing. "Worse. You're catastrophe." He smirked, gray eyes burning. "Then I'll be your catastrophe." Of course, that was the moment my brother's voice rang out from the end of the hall. "Ha! I knew it. Pay up, gentlemen, I told you he'd kiss her before the month was out." Peals of laughter followed. Several of his friends were clustered behind him, exchanging coins. I wanted to sink through the floor. I hate this family. The Duke only chuckled, eyes never leaving mine. I don't. And despite the humiliation, despite my brother's cackling, despite my father surely fainting when he heard, I couldn't stop the traitorous smile tugging at my lips. The royal palace ballroom glittered with chandeliers, silk gowns, and the sour aftertaste of gossip. Tonight was supposed to be the grand reconciliation between the crown prince and me, at least, according to the court whisperers. They expected me to come crawling back, weeping, begging for my engagement to be restored. Instead, I made my entrance on the Duke of Lorne's arm. The murmurs began instantly. "Is that? She dared bring him here? Bold. Reckless. Delightful." I pretended not to hear, adjusting my fan with the serenity of a queen. The Duke walked beside me, stiff-backed and calm, but the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth betrayed his amusement. My family trailed behind us, each adding their own chaos to the mix. My mother looked smug, my brother looked gleeful, and my father looked 2 seconds away from fainting into the punch bowl. The prince was waiting near the throne dais, pale but determined. "Marianne," he called, stepping forward. His voice rang across the hall. Before the court, I ask you, will you reconsider your decision? Will you return to my side? The ballroom hushed. All eyes turned to me. I raised my brows. Return? My prince, forgive me, but I'm not a library book. Laughter rippled through the crowd. The prince flushed, but pressed on desperately. I was a fool before. You're the only one worthy to be my queen. Stop. My fan snapped shut with a sharp crack. You want me now that I'm interesting. Now that the Duke looks at me like I'm worth the world. But where was this devotion when you were parading around with another woman? Gasps. Murmurs. The prince's face went crimson. Do you deny it? I pressed. He faltered. Silence. I turned to the crowd with a bright smile. There you have it. Trash confirmed. The hall erupted, some laughing, some scandalized, all entertained. And then, before the moment could scatter, the Duke stepped forward. He caught my hand, bold, unshakable, and dropped to one knee in the center of the ballroom. The entire world went still. Lady Marianne, he said, voice steady as iron, eyes locked on mine. You are clever, infuriating, reckless, and the only woman who has ever undone me. I would rather be ruined with you than exalted without you. Will you be mine? My breath caught. The court gasped in unison. Behind me, my brother yelled, finally, while my mother dabbed at her eyes and my father muttered something about early retirement. I looked down at the Duke, the terrifying, stoic man who'd kissed me in secret hallways and guarded me against the world, and I laughed. Not cruelly, not mockingly. Joyfully. Fine, I said, slipping my hand into his. But only if you agree to keep being my catastrophe. His lips curved into the rarest, most devastating smile I'd ever seen. He rose smoothly, pulled me against him, and kissed me. Right there, in front of the prince, the court, the kingdom. The ballroom exploded in noise, outrage, delight, applause. My brother whooped. My mother sighed dramatically. My father muttered, "We're all going to die," into his goblet. And me? I just melted into the kiss, reveling in the chaos I'd created. Later, as the night wound down and the nobles buzzed with scandal, I leaned against the Duke's shoulder in the garden. Do you regret it? He asked quietly, thumb brushing my hand. Throwing out the story. Tossing away everything they expected. I smirked. Regret? Never. The story was boring. I prefer my version. He chuckled, low and warm. So do I. And when he kissed me again beneath the starlight, I knew it wasn't just rebellion anymore. It was love. And so, the villainess who refused to cry, who mocked her cheating prince, who threw the plot into the fire, walked away with her catastrophe and her happy ending.